Our story today starts with a hurricane named Helene. Traveling a path of almost 500 miles, the storm wasn't known for its strength. Because of the shape of the mountains, warm moist air was pushed up the slopes of the mountains, cooling the air down. The faster the air cools down, the more vapor condensates, and the more rain there is. This phenomenon helped areas getting up to 30 inches of rainfall in under a couple of days. Logistics are tricky. There are certain things that need attention first, mainly critical infrastructure. It might sound counterproductive to save society's fanciest toys first, but consider the alternative. In some cases, ignoring these parts of a society could slow down rescue efforts, and in others, ignoring them in times of stress could cause critical failures and make a bad situation that much worse. Once you have all the important stuff, like hospitals, back and running, we can start to reinstate civilian use infrastructure. So, where do you start? Well, in almost every case, you want to start with whatever helps the most people with a single action. If you have an electrical line that serves 1 million customers, and another with 1, you'll always send your repairman to the first line. But this simple idea exemplifies why Helene was so bad. A lot of people in this region of the United States are isolated, so if you have a house in the middle of fucking nowhere, well, unfortunately, you probably aren't getting your power on for a couple weeks. Unlike Florida that has infrastructure to handle regular hurricanes.
Another one.
And unlike cities that have all their infrastructure consolidated in one place, the western North Carolina region is uniquely fucked to handle something like this. So, why am I talking about this? Well, one thing in particular stood out since my experience up there. Not the destruction, not the kindness all the locals showed, or all the harrowing stories I heard from survivors. It was the fucking conspiracy. I know far too many people that believe in the conspiracy that the US government built and used a hurricane machine to devastate this region of the US to get access to fucking lithium mines. Jesus. So how is it possible they believe in this? I mean, me and them roughly agree on a set of facts. Helene did hit a weird area of the US, the flooding was pretty biblical, and the government response kind of did appear slow. But while I can explain them with climate change and the aforementioned problem with logistics in this region, they ascribe malice to both. Maybe they think a storm like this couldn't naturally happen. Maybe they think FEMA response was slow. I mean, it could have been better. Anecdotally, I saw FEMA about a week after I arrived at my base camp. But I had also seen military convoys since the day I arrived, handing out food, water, and helping with first response. Different emergency responses require different agencies. Maybe it was people on Twitter blaming logistics and safety practices on malice. Like, remember when Elon tried to say that the FAA was shutting down airspace for civilian rescue maliciously? Pete Buttigieg had to explain that with thousands of helicopters in the sky, it was hazardous to introduce more air traffic. I would know. I saw hundreds of these fuckers every day. Or how about that time that Elon and Trump said FEMA only handed out $700? That $700 is a survival stimmy, and you have to apply to get a bigger check. So why is this bad? Well, I had to explain to people how they could get free money, but they didn't apply for it because Trump and Elon said it didn't exist. And they fucking believed him. Words matter, especially words from powerful people. Maybe what they believe is insane. And hell, maybe the people themselves are crazy. But I'm not going to be a lazy cunt and write it off. Because A, it's just not that simple. And B, everyone has at least one conspiracy they actually believe in. Buying into any narrative is a slow and incremental process. And a lot of times, you aren't even aware you're caught by its gravity. I've had my eye on flat earthers for almost a decade, and they've been the laughingstock of the internet for at least that long. I've always enjoyed watching YouTube science, and I always love to see a person getting shit on. So really, what's more to love? And also, how can they believe what they believe? It's fucking insane, right? A flat earth? Well, I found this really interesting study from the Journal of Science trying to understand what groups are susceptible to believe conspiracies. The first concept I want to define is just knowledge. Roughly, it's just the sum of all information that appears relevant to understand a concept. The second concept outlined by the study is actually the one I'm more interested in right now, and I dub it conspiracy brain. I'll define it as roughly the proclivity to connect two unrelated concepts, a case of pattern recognition gone wrong. So let's see how these two concepts work with each other. So, the finding of the study looking at flat earthers? Well, funny enough, intelligence and scientific knowledge isn't the controlling factor. There are roughly 4 groups of people with these 2 factors, and this is their response to each set of conspiracy stimuli. Group 1, high scientific knowledge, low conspiracy. These people have very low proclivities to believe conspiracies. 2, low scientific knowledge, low conspiracy. These people also have pretty low proclivities to believe conspiracies. Group 3, high scientific knowledge and high conspiracy. These people have slightly higher proclivities to conspiracies, framed in strictly conspiratorial manners. If you want to get these people to believe in a flat earth, you would probably make arguments that are embedded in their distrust of the government. And number 4, low science, high conspiracy. These people have high proclivities to believe conspiracies no matter what argument is made. Whether government distrust or gravity-based arguments, doesn't matter. To use an analogy, knowledge is like ammunition, and conspiracy brain is like a weapon. While discrete information is usually the same for everyone, different weapons can produce different results with the same ammunition. Sometimes certain ammo is incompatible with certain weapons, and with no ammo, you can't make a conspiracy, or even a connection, because there are no points to connect. I think there are roughly 4 different weapons that affect distinct parts of your truth-finding mechanism: emotion, logic, perception, and repetition. I like Alex O'Connor's view on a lot of things philosophy, but especially his views on emotivism. Roughly put, he thinks moral statements are an expression of emotion. This can be a really, really handy rhetorical tool. The easiest way to elicit emotion is to use words that hold moral weight. Imagine something you perceive as negative happening. You consider your emotional response, and then use the word that corresponds with that emotion. When you use certain words like rape, murder, terrorist, or genocide, people should know your position on the material event, and to some degree, the magnitude of moral wrongdoing. Most people perceive Democrats as the emotional ones, so I'll oblige. Think of one of the main slogans from Kamala Harris' campaign: Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. Well, fun fact, most Democrats have no fucking clue how Trump is a threat to democracy. They know he did J6, and that's about it. Whenever they hear threat to democracy, it probably elicits emotions of all the times they as individuals felt disgusted at his behavior, but it doesn't mean it conveys a fact. I had the opportunity to go to Kamala Harris' campaign office, and it fucking astonished me how almost no one there knew who Jack Smith was. In case you didn't know, Trump had like 2 plans to overturn the election, even before the ECA deadline, and J6 was really just a cherry on top of a big piece of shit. So when I hear Trump is a threat to democracy, I think of the immunity case, the Jack Smith indictments, pre- and post-immunity, the J6 special counsel, and a bunch of other shit I just want to forget I ever read. However, the emotion that gets felt between me and the average Democrat will probably be pretty similar, irrespective of how much information we both know. Oh, and Machiavellian pro tip, if you're going to use emotion, don't draw your feelings from something abstract like our form of government, and definitely do not wrap it in layers of nuance that require hundreds of hours of research. Instead, try to make people cry about how expensive everything is. That's way fucking easier, and it gets reinforced almost every time you step outside. Imagine you're taking a math test, and you know a bunch of possible formulas you could use, but you don't know which one. Then you look over and see your neighbor already has an answer, and he showed his work. You can look just long enough to see the answer, and anything more, and the teacher will catch you. So, what you do is look at the answer and plug that into every formula you can find, until you find a way to make your reasoning match your predetermined conclusion. Motivated reasoning, post hoc ad hoc, and backwards rationalization, pick your poison, they all kind of do the same thing. They put the cart before the horse. Ideally, a person's logic drives their conclusion, and if the logic is observed to give an unexpected solution, you change your reasoning, not just so you're more accurate in that scenario, but in all future situations. Well, in the case of the math test, you could either cheat because you aren't confident in yourself, you're confident in your neighbor's answer, or you're just worried your answer doesn't make sense and you want a second opinion. But what happens if you have no idea how smart your neighbor is? What happens if you prefer an answer that makes no sense? And what happens if your neighbor's answer is right, but you completely butcher the logic? Wouldn't it just be better if we worked it out on our own? So, why is it a bad idea to put the cart before the horse? Well, I wouldn't be talking about motivated reasoning if humans didn't almost always prefer one answer over another. But we almost always do.
What's wrong with AIDS? Why doesn't anyone want me to give them AIDS? There he is, beating that dead horse!
Despite what the dysphomism implies, beating the dead horse is probably the best way to convey an idea. Why? Well, apparently biology. For a variety of reasons, evolution found it convenient to have a bias towards something you think you have a good understanding of. This is called processing fluency. You ever listen to a song and at first it's kinda mid, but the more you listen to it, the more you like it? Or ever notice despite there being tens of thousands of TV shows, you keep watching The Office every year? Well, here's an experiment you can actually try at home. If you don't like a certain food, just eat it every day for about 2 weeks to get into acquired taste. I did this for curry, and it actually kinda worked. YouTuber Veritasium has a pretty good video on this, but roughly, the more you repeat something, the more you understand it. And the more you understand it, two things happen. The first is you have an easier time believing that thing to be true, and the second thing is you enjoy that thing more. Here are some notes from the Journal of Science. 1. Prior experiences to fake news increases its perceived accuracy. 2. Illusory truth can happen for both implausible and plausible claims. 3. Prior knowledge does not necessarily protect people against illusory truth. And 4. Illusory truth does not appear to be moderated by thinking styles such as analytical versus intuitive reasoning. Humans accept information that supports their worldview really, really easily. It's one of our quirks. Another one is our hatred for information that dismantles our worldview. We just won't think it's true. Or, we'll even go so far as to avoid coming into contact with such information in the future. Selective perception appears in two forms, technological and psychological. Let's say you enjoy political content A and dislike B. Whatever the reason, whether accuracy, entertainment, moral, it doesn't really matter. Because you enjoy A more, the difference in watch time, even if milliseconds, will be measured and recorded. The internet is more likely to show you content from that side and steer you away from side B. Because you're human, you gravitate towards things that make you feel good, and information that reinforces your worldview. After a while, even if the information is correct, you will have an easier time accepting the information as true, due to you believing you have a firm grasp on the topic. When talking to a person on side B with an incompatible worldview, if incongruent information appears, you will either doubt the veracity of their source or trust the veracity of yours. Selective perception funnels us into holding certain perspectives over others because we think ours holds more value. Repetition makes information itself seem more valid and/or enjoyable. This is a clear feedback loop. With these noted effects from science, it starts to make sense in the original study why intelligence was not found to be the controlling factor to believe conspiracies. Epistemic nihilism to me is the philosophy that objective truth, whatever you define it as, is something humans are unable to obtain. I think this has always been the case, but with the advent of infinite data and all these algorithms to exploit your psychology, I don't think it's just a philosophy anymore. I think it's risen to the noticeable and observable phenomenon, which I dub epistemic dissonance. This is the idea that worldviews held by individuals are drifting apart and slowly becoming incompatible with everyone else. But how does this all happen? This video is framed around believing conspiracies, but in reality, what I call conspiracy brain and all the mental processes that happen under it, happen every time you think. I just chose conspiracies because it seems like the most extreme place where all these processes happen. Coming into contact with more unbelievable worldviews seems more common nowadays, so to sum up why I in part think all this political and social divide is happening.
Do you ever look at someone and wonder what is going on inside their head?
Holy shit.
We started off by trying to explain how perfectly normal, honest people can believe in shit we think is fucking crazy. It's not enough to call them stupid, because even if they are, that's just reductionist and fucking retarded in and of itself. We looked at what groups of people are susceptible, and it did not seem to be a lack of relevant information causing them to believe. It seemed to be the addition of some wayward pattern recognition that I call conspiracy brain. People with high conspiracy brain seem to be more likely to buy into intent-based arguments, and people with low intelligence seem to be more likely to buy into incorrect, fact-based arguments. Conspiracy brain can be swayed with emotion, logic, perception, and repetition. Consider some common applications for these weapons. A progressive is highly likely to employ the emotivism weapon for what they consider are human rights, and a religious right will often use motivated reasoning to argue against a scientific consensus. But don't fall into the trap of thinking both extremes only stick to one weapon. Since the far left is probably the far more educated extreme, I think they use motivated reasoning to arrive at equally insane conclusions as the far right.
Tibet was literally a fucking feudal slave mandate, like
So
autonomous zone.
China did them a favor.
That was one. I mean, in America, when I say something like this, people get very upset. You know, we talk about the Dalai Lama saying "suck my tongue" or whatever, but like that's not far from the norm in fucking normal Tibetan existence before the Communist Party came in and
So
took
China
over.
unilaterally took over Tibet.
Like
Well,
these are
their culture. They basically are trying to, homogenize the culture.
if your culture.
They're trying to spoil the religion and the identity.
The part of
And they did them
feudal
a favor.
warlords and slavery, abolishing that. Yes, I do think that is good.
No, China did them a favor.
I'm not going to cry a fucking river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. I don't give a fuck. They're terrible people. These people are not your allies. They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture that is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways.
But the other two weapons are far more insidious. You have a partisan bias. It's probably impossible not to. Maybe it's not noticeable by any human, but it is so fucking obvious to machines. The difference between video watch time is measured in milliseconds, and they will gently place its fingers on the scale to get you to consume ever more content. Machines and algorithms use human bias to measure and amplify our preferences, the same way that the food industry gets us to eat the tastiest and most unnutritious food. Last, repetition. Simply put, the more times you hear something, the more certain that you are that that thing is true. So, remember, next time you're just casually browsing the internet, there are a lot of forces at play in this info war. I focused a lot in this video about conspiracy brain, and I want to look in the next video on the consumption of knowledge. Because you can have the best thought process in the world, but it doesn't matter if the information you intake is horrible.